You know, when it comes to politics, a city budget isn't just a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. It's really a statement about what a city values. And right now, in Chicago, there's a huge political drama playing out over their nearly $17 billion budget. It's pitting the mayor against his own city council in a showdown that could seriously reshape the city's future. So let's break down how we got to this.
Now that might look like the final score of a Bulls game, but it's not. Nope, that's the vote count that just made history. For the very first time, Chicago City Council passed a budget that wasn't just without the mayor's support, it was a budget designed in direct opposition to his biggest ideas. I mean, we're talking about an unprecedented political rebellion.
And the stakes here? They couldn't be higher. According to our sources over at WTTW News, this whole standoff could throw the city into its worst fiscal crisis in decades, which of course raises the big question, how did it get this bad?
What we're watching unfold is really nothing short of a full-blown budget revolt. You have a majority of the city's alderpersons, those are the members of the city council, who have flat-out rejected Mayor Brandon Johnson's spending plan and passed their own. This is setting up a major confrontation that could end up defining his entire first term.
Okay, so what's at the heart of this fight? Well, it really boils down to two completely different ideas for how to run the city and, maybe more importantly, who should pay for it all. It's a classic political battle, a clash between two competing visions for what Chicago should be.
So, let's break this down. On one side, you have the mayor. He wants to bring in new taxes on big businesses to pay for things like violence prevention programs. But on the other side, you have the council. They want to find savings, efficiencies, increase some fees, and get really aggressive about collecting old debts. They're arguing that new corporate taxes might just drive businesses right out of the city. And the mayor's plan, it gets really specific. He's targeting large companies with something called a head tax, basically a tax per employee. He's even proposing this first-of-its-kind tax on social media companies. The message he's sending is pretty clear. It's time for big corporations to pay their fair share.
And here it is. This is the council's response. This document, their own alternative budget, it lays out a completely different path forward. It's really a point-by-point rejection of the mayor's whole approach, and it's focused on totally different ways to raise money and cut costs.
So the council's strategy is totally different. Instead of that head tax, they're banking on a huge, one-time cash infusion from collecting old city debts. They also think they can find millions in those efficiencies and raise the rest through smaller things like higher garbage fees and new advertising deals.
And the mayor's reaction to this plan?
Well, he did not hold back. He called the council's idea to sell city debt. We're talking things like unpaid parking tickets and ambulance bills to private collection agencies morally bankrupt. His argument is that it would end up hurting the city's poorest residents the most. And this table right here, this gets to the absolute core of the problem. The mayor's own finance team is saying the council's math just doesn't work. They're calling the revenue numbers fraught assumptions. Look at this. They're saying some of the proposals, like hiking the liquor tax, would actually lose the city millions of dollars. So this isn't just a philosophical disagreement anymore. It's a battle over basic facts. Now, all this intense political fighting is leading a lot of people in Chicago to draw comparisons to a really famous, or maybe I should say infamous, period in the city's history known as the Council Wars.
So for those of you who might not know, the original council wars happened back in the 80s. A group of white alderpersons basically created legislative gridlock to block everything that Harold Washington, the city's first black mayor, tried to do. It was this racially charged conflict that paralyzed city government for 3 whole years, until a court order finally broke the stalemate.
And you better believe the mayor's allies are leaning into that comparison hard. Alderman Siccho Lopez is explicitly framing the current opposition as a return to that really divisive time, even dropping the name of the original Council Wars leader, Edward Oleac.
But, and this is a big but, here's where it gets really complicated. Other alderpersons, even some who are against the council's budget, are pushing back on that comparison. Alderman Vasquez, who's also a progressive, is basically saying, hey, let's not cheapen history. To him, this is a policy dispute, not a repeat of the 1980s.
So, with all these historical echoes in the background, and two sides completely dug in, Chicago now finds itself right on the brink of a government shutdown, with some very real consequences for everyone who lives there.
And the clock? Oh, it is ticking loudly. There are just 10 days left before the deadline hits. If a budget isn't in place by then, Chicago city government will shut down for the first time in its history.
So why should you care? What does a shutdown actually mean? Well, for starters, over 30,000 city workers won't get paid. Critical services could just stop. And on top of that, a credit downgrade from Wall Street would make it more expensive for Chicago to borrow money for years, a cost that, you guessed it, taxpayers would eventually have to cover.
With so much on the line, the question on everyone's mind is, what on earth happens now? What's the next move in this high-stakes game of political chicken?
Okay, so the path to a crisis is actually pretty clear. And kind of scary. First, the mayor is almost certain to veto the council's budget. Then the council would have to try and override that veto, but they'd need even more votes to do it, 34 out of 50. If they can't get them and no compromise is reached before the deadline, the city shuts down. Simple as that.
So, at the end of the day, this whole thing boils down to a massive dilemma for Mayor Johnson. Does he stand on principle and veto a budget he's called morally bankrupt and risk a catastrophic shutdown? Or does he swallow his pride and allow it to become law, avoiding a crisis but also suffering a huge political defeat that could weaken his entire term?
Ultimately, the entire financial future of Chicago is hanging in the balance. Are its leaders going to find a way to compromise? Or will this historic political showdown push one of America's greatest cities into a crisis it's never seen before?